Tathagata's true meaning. Good evening, Bodhisattvas and future corpses. Let's begin by putting our hands together and acknowledging that Los Angeles sits on the land of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. We acknowledge the Gabrielino Tongva as the original caretakers of Tovangar, which spans Los Angeles County and the California Channel Islands. The Gabrielino Tongva people continue to remain in relationship with these lands through ceremony, culture, and stewardship. They are important parts of not only the history of this area, but also in continuing knowledge of this place. And for those of you zooming in, please acknowledge the original inhabitants of the land you currently are on. So I mentioned last fall at a talk I gave that the board, ZCLA Board of Directors, had made a commitment each year to have we set aside a small pot of money to donate to other nonprofits. And the board made a policy that some portion of that every year should be given to the Tongva Land Trust to help support the repurchase by the Tongva people of land here in the LA Basin. And so last year, which was the first year of the policy, it was in my discretion, and we used all of the funds from that pot of money to support the Tongva Land Trust. And I encourage all of you to also do so and to give what you can to this important purpose. Sesshin Day 2, second day of Sesshin, and the last full day of Sesshin. So how is it going? Are you tired of your stories yet? Has your discursive mind given up, or is it still holding on? Here we are in this beginner's mind session, and it's been wonderful. Maybe not for you, but for me it's been great, because we've put all sorts of people in new positions. So-called beginners are in positions, and then so-called old timers are often, a lot of them are in new positions for them, and in between as well. So there's been a lot of these so-called mistakes. When I was seeing someone in face-to-face yesterday, I said, we don't use that word here. We just say idiosyncratic presentation. So there's been a lot of idiosyncratic presentation, which is great. And the whole point of Sesshin is to just see, the whole point of Sesshin is to just put ourselves in a position to see what's going on in our mind. Right? The Zendo is a simplified space. And it's simplified because it's not like we want to just get something here and leave it at the door when we exit. Right? This is the proving ground. This is the laboratory for us to take it on the road. But we have this simplified space to make it a little bit easier to see what's coming up in our mind. So in beginner's mind sesshin, we give you a lot to work with in your minds. So, and hopefully it's been great. with the right attitude, it's just, oh, isn't that interesting? Oh, isn't that interesting? And as we've seen, all these so-called seniors have had their, we won't call them senior moments, let's call them beginner moments. They've had lots of beginner moments. People, I mean, Sensei Muke, of course, he hasn't been a meal leader in decades, probably. And so he was thrown into being meal leader for a meal yesterday. And I don't think that Gikai is here right now. He's our head server. And he's you know, it's fantastic for me as the abbot when I sort of look over and I mention something to him that he's forgotten. And the deer in the headlights, like, look, that just sort of suddenly pops in is just, I mean, it's, you know. What? Oh, he's, oh, well. It's like when he's Doan. But so the thing is, and this is, I'll say, this is the most important thing. Well, I'm going to say a little bit about Suzuki Roshi, so before saying what the most important thing is, I'll tell you a story. David Chadwick, who wrote Suzuki Roshi's biography, once asked him in a kind of a public face-to-face, he says, Roshi says, what is the most important thing? And Suzuki Roshi said, do you want to know what the most important thing is? He said, yeah. He says, the most important thing is knowing what is the most important thing. And that was it. But for our purposes, we'll say in Sesshin, the most important thing is when you make this so-called mistake, what do you do with it in your mind? Do you use it as an opportunity to beat yourself up? Or do you just fold it in and just keep going? That's the most important question. Because we're all screw up. Look, I screwed up today. I'm not going to tell you how, but I did. I knew. I've forgotten already. You were sitting right next to me, so if you didn't see it, it didn't happen. But we all screw up. And people come into face-to-face, oh, my mind is wandering. Oh, that's never happened before in this endo. You know, I mean, everyone comes in and says, oh, their mind is wandering. They are counting and suddenly it's 23, or they can't get past 2. And I say to them that if you look in this room, every single person who's ever sat in this room has had the exact same experience. This is the human condition. Of course, some of us want to be special, so it's a terrible blow to find out that what they're experiencing is completely normal. But the question is, when you find yourself at 23, what do you do with it? Just go back to 1. We just go back. We don't beat ourselves up. Beating ourselves up is just another form of ego gratification, right? Because then I'm the best, I'm the worst. If you're the worst, it's the same as being the best, because it's all about me. So over and over and over again during Sesshin, we have this opportunity, and we, in these beginner's positions, wherever you are, if you're in the position for the first time, there's just this, you know, oftentimes sheer terror. I'm only speaking personally, your results may vary. But my experience over 20 some odd years is that often I'd be asked to do something, and of course you say yes. That is the Zen way. And then you're thrown into it. I will say I think, get a lot more training now than they used to in the old time. But in any event, you are thrown into it and you just do it. And over and over and over, you just get into the habit of you just do it, and you understand that everything we do here, from hitting the bell to walking to chanting to how we do a bow, how we come into the face-to-face room, it's all part of a whole line. So the first time you do it, it's going to be the best you can, and then you're going to start in this long process of refining. And the refinement is it's the refinement that's basically polishing the jewel. You are the jewel. Our practice together is the jewel of one body practice. And we're constantly polishing it. We're taking the rough edges off. If we were here in Sesshin for another 5 days, you can really see the shift that happens, the shift in how we chant together, how we walk together, how we eat together, although there's always a day where everything falls apart, which is great. But we have this shift because we are all practicing as one body. That's the essence of Sesshin, is one body practice. And this beginner's mind, so there's two different forms we can say of this beginner's mind. There's the beginner's mind of just being a beginner and being thrown into something, and you just don't know what you're doing, and that's fantastic. If you really think you know what you're doing, that's when the trouble begins. And if you're in a position like this, the minute you start getting these robes, it's really dangerous. I'm not kidding. Because they can be seductive. They can be, there are stories, there have been people here who've gotten these robes and thought that they were something hot. And a lot of harm and a lot of pain came out of that. So, it's great to be a beginner, and it's great to work with beginners. It's great to practice with beginners. It's a lot of fun. So when we have these moments, how we work with them is really the most important thing. Because we're all going to make these so-called mistakes. We're all going to have our idiosyncratic presentations, which is fantastic. But then the question is, when we see it, how do we respond? So out in the rear gaitan, you'll see there's a big piece of redwood and some carving on it. And the writing on it is from Maizumi Roshi, our founder, and he's adapting a writing of Dogen Zenji. We've been reading Dogen Zenji during the afternoon block. Dogen Zenji was the founder of our school in Japan. So Dogen Zenji went from Japan to China, and there met his main teacher, Ru Jing, and really had an incredible enlightenment experience with Ru Jing. Ru Jing was a really very interesting guy. Some other time. And came back and basically brought the Soto tradition with him. So there'd been Buddhism in Japan, and there'd been some form of Zen, but it didn't survive, and it ended up coming back later, but it was just, and so when we read this Fukan Zazengi, it's important, I think we aren't going to read it again, but we read it all the time. And what I encourage you to understand is the circumstances under which it was written. So Dogen Zenji was all of, I believe, 29 years old at the time he wrote it. He was coming back from China to Japan, and he was basically bringing this new form with him. The form was Zazen. It was the Soto practice, which was really emphasizing Shikantaza and what's called the silent illumination school. And this was unheard of. Like, sitting like this was not known. It wasn't popular in Japan. And so when it says it, when the title says the universal promotion of the practice of Zazen, he's basically bringing back something that says, this is really good stuff. This is what you do, and here's how you do it. And so I always love to understand that, because it's the first thing he wrote when he came back from China. But in any event, a few years later, when he founded his first monastery, which was about 7 years later, he wrote a series of instructions for how to comport yourself in the Zendo. And some of it is very specific to the time. So he says things like, don't come in smelling of onions and garlic. And Maezumi Roshi on ours says, don't come in smelling of strong perfume. So it's been updated a little bit. It's the 2.0 version. But both of them say the same thing. It says, correct mistakes and don't hate them. And that's really an important, there's so much heart in that, in this sense of, it's not just in ourselves, but in how we relate to one another. How do we relate to one another so that we are supporting one another and not pulling each other down? Sometimes these temples can be places of intrigue and politics and all of that stuff. It's a terrible thing. It's just the ego coming out in another way. It's just spiritual materialism, as Trungpa Rinpoche said. So one form of this beginner's mind is the kind of the mind of terror that sort of then will mature into the constant refining of our practice, so that the first time you hit the bell here in the Zendo, it's scary and exciting, because this bell has been hit by, from back to 1967. Joko Beck and Bernie Glassman and Maezumi Roshi and all these people were all here, probably all hit this bell with that little mallet. For all of them, it told them when to stop sitting and get up, all of these things. And then your relationship to the bell will change over time. Because first you're just like, don't want to screw up. That's the bottom line. Again, your results may vary. I'm just talking personally. You don't want it to be so quiet that no one can hear it. You don't want it to be so loud that it sounds like a clang. And so you're working on hitting the bell. And then there's just hitting the bell. And at a certain point, you understand that you're not hitting the bell and making a sound. You're pulling sound out of the bell. And there's just constant refinement. And it's that way with serving the food. How you bow. If you're receiving the food, if you're serving the food, how you bow. Bowing to one another is an incredibly beautiful act. So, and of course, at the beginning, it's like, I don't want to drop the food, I want to serve it, I want to get out of here. And that's the way it can be. And then over time, it becomes beautiful. And since Sensei Shogun started on it, we won't even start on the whole practice of oryoki, which ends up being incredibly beautiful poetry. But it may take a little while to get there. Okay. But this is not the beginner's mind that Suzuki Roshi is talking about in his book. That is, as I said in my preliminary comments on Thursday night, is something different. So he says, this is from Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. He says, in Japan we have the phrase shoshin, which means beginner's mind. The goal of practice is always to keep our beginner's mind. Suppose you recite the Prajna Paramita Sutra only once. It might be a very good recitation, but what would happen to you if you recite it twice, 3 times, 4 times, or more? You might easily lose your original attitude towards it. The same thing will happen in your other Zen practices. For a while, you will keep your beginner's mind, but if you continue to practice 1, 2, 3 years or more, although you may improve some, you are liable to lose the limitless meaning of original mind. So that's another purpose of this Sesshin, which is Sesshin is an opportunity for us to really drop into that deep well, into that original mind, to rest in what in our tradition we call not knowing. Not knowing is just opening up, no obstructions, everything clear, dropping our knowing mind. In this same vein, Suzuki Roshi says, for Zen students, the most important thing is not to be dualistic. Our original mind includes everything within itself. It is always rich and sufficient within itself. You should not lose your self-sufficient state of mind. This does not mean a closed mind, but actually an empty mind and a ready mind. If your mind is empty, it is always ready for anything. It is open to everything. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. So this is this sense of freedom. In the Gate of Sweet Nectar tomorrow, we'll have as our morning service rather than what we've been having the last 2 days. There's a line where it says, playing freely in the fields of the Pure Land. That's the beginner's mind, just this complete sense of freedom. And the freedom is unrestricted by thinking, unrestricted by rules, just a complete absorption and authority within oneself. So it's a state of, I will say, authority, by which I mean that we're not restricted in this sense of, we don't have all these kind of rules fall away. It doesn't mean that we act in a pathological or social state. When I teach the precept class, when we teach the precept class, we often say the precepts are here essentially as training wheels, right? They're here as guides for us, and as our practice develops, the precepts can fall away, not because we don't need them, but because we are them. Because our natural functioning is an expression of precept practice. This is the same as this not knowing, which is all these, to drop into not knowing is to drop all ideas, fixed ideas of self and other. Suzuki Roshi says, if you discriminate too much, you limit yourself. If you are too demanding or too greedy, your mind is not rich and self-sufficient. All self-centered thoughts limit our vast mind. When we have no thought of achievement, no thought of self, we are truly beginners. Then we can really learn something. I think that's very interesting, the way he says this. Then we can really learn something. As long as we know, we don't have a capacity to learn. It's the beginner's mind. It's the mind of inquiry. It's the mind of, isn't that interesting? Rather than, oh no. That's the mind of openness and learning. He ends this by saying, so the most difficult thing is always to keep your beginner's mind. There is no need to have a deep understanding of Zen. Even though you read much Zen literature, you must read each sentence with a fresh mind. You should not say, I know what Zen is, or I have attained enlightenment. This is also the real secret of the arts. Always be a beginner. Be very careful about this point. If you start to practice Zazen, you will begin to appreciate your beginner's mind. It is the secret of Zen practice. So, thought I came across a koan. I've been moving recently. Well, I moved in October. I'm still unpacking. So I came across a koan this week, and it's an awesome example of not having beginner's mind. So I thought I would share it with you. This is from the Mumonkan, which is one of the primary koan collections that we work with here. It's called Case 30. It's Case 39, and I'm going to read 3 translations of it because they're very different, and I think it's quite interesting to see these 3 different translations. And I'll tell you my favorite. But the translation that is from the book we ordinarily use here is called Ummon and a Mistake in Speech. A monk once asked Ummon, "The radiance serenely illuminates the whole vast universe." Before he could finish the first line, Ummon suddenly interrupted, "Aren't those the words of Chosetsu Shusai?" The monk replied, "Yes, they are." Ummon said, "You have slipped up in the words." Afterwards, which is to say 200 years later, Zen master Sesshin brought the matter up and said, "Tell me, at what point did he slip?" Here's another translation. This is from another teacher. This is from a Rinzai teacher, Zenke Shibayama. His translation goes like this. The title is, Ummon says, "You have missed it." A monk once wanted to ask Ummon a question and started to say, "The light serenely shines over the whole universe." Before he had even finished the first line, Ummon suddenly interrupted, "Isn't that the poem of Chosetsu Shusai?" The monk asked, "Yes, it is." Ummon said, "You have missed it." Later, Master Sesshin took up this koan and said, "Now tell me, why has this monk missed it?" So, this is the 3rd translation. This is from Guogu. Guogu is a Chan master, a successor of Shengyan. And he's done a new translation from the Chinese of the Mumonkan that's really wonderful. And I first came across it because Reverend Jitsujo used this translation for a talk she gave about a year and a half ago. And I ran out and bought it immediately. And it has a different flavor. Guogu's translation. Yunmen's "Your words fail." A monk asked Yunmen about the poem. "The brilliant and quiescent luminosity pervades everywhere like sands in the Ganges." Before his sentence was finished, Yunmen interrupted, "Are these not the words of scholar Zhang Zhuo?" The monk replied, "Yes." Yunmen said, "Failed." Later, Sesshin picked this case up and said, "How did the monk's words fail?" So that's got some good energy in it, right? Fail. Failed. Now, I will say that 95% of the commentaries over the course of time have been incredibly praising of Ummon for his brilliant alacrity. I mean, I could read them to you, but they go on and on about how fantastic Ummon is. This monk, he's just reciting a poem, and Ummon just cuts him off and says, "Aren't these the words of blah, blah, blah?" And the monk's like, "Yes." And then he's like, "Failed." And everyone's like, "Oh, these guys, man, this Ummon, he's a pretty big deal. He's so good. He's so good." And, even Master Hakuin says, if you don't understand how great Ummon's words were here, Like, you're not even like a Zen person. He literally says that. Guogu says, in this case, there are two people who fail, a monk and Ummon. So, that's the real question. Sesshin says, how did the monk's words fail? Then the question is, how did Ummon's words fail? Now, this poor monk, we've all been there. He thinks he's just having a conversation, and suddenly this guy is like, being all Zen master on him. He thinks he's just having a conversation, but Ummon's job is to help him wake up. Right? That's the only thing you get. The only thing you should understand about this robe is that our job, when you get it, is to help everyone else wake up. That's it. And as I said before, the problems come when people think it means something else. So here, Ummon, he's trying, he's working. And when we see these koans, if you're in koan study, or if you hear these koans in talks, sometimes they seem kind of crazy. And oftentimes they are. They certainly don't make any sense, and they're not supposed to. But what they are is they're efforts by a teacher to try to get us to wake up. And the teachers, over the course of time, they develop, the function of the teacher is to meet the student where they are. And the first time that you get this instruction is when you're the head trainee at your Hosen ceremony. Because at the Hosen ceremony, so Kyogen in October will have his Dharma combat ceremony. He'll present a case, and then 20 some odd people will ask him questions. And it's the whole range of people who ask questions. And his assignment, should he wish to accept it, is to meet them where they are. So if when I did it, there was someone here who I think was here for the second time. And you're not going to deal with them the same way you're going to deal with someone who's been here for 15 years. And it's the same with the teachers. When you go into face-to-face, a teacher will treat you very differently if you're here for the second time, as opposed to as if you've been working with them for a long time. If you've been working with them for a long time, they're a lot meaner. That's basically the rule. But that's the thing. The teacher, because they develop the trust, and they can be just cutting. So here, Ummon is very cutting. Failed. But in saying that, he's trying to get him to wake up too. So Ummon has two lines in this. And in both instances, he's trying to get the student out of his intellectual thinking mind. Because the student is the student is just reciting a verse. Now, this is an incredibly important line, he's saying. The light serenely shines over the whole universe. It's completely true. It's an expression of real awakening. It was the line, so this guy, the poem of Chosetsu Shusai. Chosetsu Shusai, we don't need to go into it, you can read it in the book. He has a whole long story. He has this incredible awakening experience, and he writes this verse immediately. And this is the first line of the verse. And it's his expression of his awakening, of his enlightenment experience. And it's very beautiful. He was a real poet. But for the monk, it's just dead words. He's bringing in dead words. And this is the most important thing. Which is, when we are here, when we are practicing, when we are seeing a teacher, when we are chanting in the Buddha hall, when we are bowing, when we are offering food, it has to be our practice. No one else can do it for us. It's our practice. So it's not that Ummon is saying, don't learn the literature, don't read. He's not saying that. Ummon himself was a great scholar and regularly quotes from other teachers in his writings and in his sayings. He's not saying that, but he's trying to get this monk out of his head, trying to get him to wake up. And so he decides, and we assume Ummon was considered one of the true greats, one of the great teachers. He ended up having 60 successors, and out of all of the koan collections, he's the one who shows up the most. He's the VIP, number one, most quoted. So we can assume he had some relationship with this monk who goes unnamed, but is, I will say, the subject of great scorn through many centuries of commentary. Poor guy. So the first thing he does, trying to get this monk to get out of his head, bam! Aren't these the words of Chosetsu Shusai? Now, in Shibayama's commentary, he says, the monk responds, yes, it is. How regrettable, this is what Shibayama says. Why couldn't he at least say, I do not know? He says, being a Zen monk, he ought to be able to give a live Zen answer of his own. Then he says, sure enough, Ummon's denunciation immediately fell upon him. You have missed it. So that's his second effort to get him to wake up, right? It's like, what have I missed? And, many of these koans, many of these stories are exchanges between a master and a student. And, there's lots of happy endings. Then the monk had great enlightenment. But this one doesn't have that. And that's why Guogu says there were two fails here. There's the monk and there's Ummon, because Ummon is trying. He's like, work with me, kid. But he doesn't get it. Okay. But it comes to us. And it is for us a cautionary story, which is, when we are working with these stories, when we are reading the literature of history, as long as it's dead words, it's just a waste of time. We have to make it our own. So when you're going in, if you're working with a teacher, if you're working on koans, as long as it's, I am working on this koan, it's not going to pass. It has to be fully embodied. Fully embodied. This practice is body practice. Completely body practice. It's about getting us out of our discriminating mind and into this body and to fully embodying whatever it is. Whether it's mu, whether it's the sound of one hand, whether it's stopping the sound of the distant temple bell, whatever the koan is, we have to just fully lose ourselves in it. So there's no self, there's no Dharma-Joy doing this. There's no Dharma-Joy doing mu, right? At some point it can become mu, mu's, mu. And even that has a subject and an object. That has to collapse. That's the practice. That's the practice that Ummon is demanding of his student here. It's the practice for all of us throughout this beginner's mind Sesshin and beyond. So when we are practicing together, it's not some intellectual experience. It's not just a game. It's really just embodying. And the embodying means we just come from that beginner's mind that Suzuki Roshi was talking about. This mind of complete possibility. what we call not knowing in the peacemaker tradition, right? We drop all ideas. From that place, there's complete freedom. Complete freedom. And from that place, we can pick up a koan, we can pick up a poem, and we can really appreciate it, and we can become it, we can inhabit it. Until there's no we, there's just it. Now, for the small self, that sounds very threatening. But I assure you, no one has popped out of existence from their Zen practice. I can't say it will never happen, but we've got 2,500 years or so of experience, so I think you're pretty safe. It's much safer than walking across the street. So, this is really the sense. And so here we are, the last night of Sesshin. Just keep going, right? This is a very short Sesshin. It's kind of like to give you a flavor, a taste of what Sesshin is. Hopefully you'll come back. We have a few more this year. And next month, Dharma holder Etsugen will be leading a Zazenkai, which starts on a Friday night and is all day Saturday. So it's basically like a mini version of what we've done today. And he'll be giving the talk, which will be wonderful. No pressure. But, but just keep coming back, and just wherever you are, you can just drop into that beginner's mind. You can do it in the standing in line at the grocery store. You can do it at the red light on the way to work. You can do it for Roshi Ryodo, when I was working on Mu. Roshi Ryodo, he used to tell me, when you finish working on some, if I'm writing a memo or I'm writing a brief or sending an email, you hit the send button and then you come back and it's like, and then you pick up the next thing. So this Sesshin, when we leave it, we bring it with us. It's that sense, it's that felt experience, it's the embodiment. So I really encourage you, don't be the monk. No one wants to hear failed. But he is here with us today. The thing is not, going back to what I said at the beginning, is not that you fail. The question is what you do with it. Right? We don't know his name. Ummon had 60 successors, and I hope that he was one of them.